so you want to know exactly what EV training in Pokemon is and how you do it. I'll be explaining that and pretty much everything else involving EV training from Generation 3 onwards, mainly because it works differently in Generation 1 and 2, and I'm not going to explain a system that is super outdated and just works completely differently. If at the end of all of this you still have questions about EV training, drop them in the comments below and I'll try to answer as many as I can. Anyway, let's first dive into why you want to EV train. EV training can be used for a number of different reasons. The main reason being either competitive battles or building a team for like the Battle Frontier in Pokemon Emerald or the Battle Tower in like Generation 4 games. Another niche reason could be you're playing a Nuzlocke or maybe a different challenge run where gaining an advantage by EV training could actually really help you. Or maybe you just want your Pokemon to be strong for any other reason. I'll show you an example of what can happen when you EV train your Pokemon. Right now I'm in the Pokemon Showdown calculator, which is where you can calculate exactly how much damage your Pokemon will deal or take. In this example, this Torterra at level 50 uses Earthquake on this level 50 Lantern. It will always knock it out in one shot, but if you have fully maxed out defense EVs on this Lantern, it will live an Earthquake. That's the power of EVs. Now that I've convinced you of the why, let's get into the what. Because what exactly is EV training? EV stands for Effort Values. They pretty much make your Pokemon stronger by training them against any Pokemon. For every Pokemon you defeat, you gain effort value points in a specific stat. Different Pokemon will give you a different amount of EVs per stat. Depending what stat a Pokemon specializes in will determine what stat it will give you EVs in after defeating it in battle. For example, Blissey, which specializes in its huge HP pool, will give you 3 HP EVs when you defeat it because it's a 3rd stage Pokemon. Whereas Shinx, who specializes in attack, will give you 1 attack EV because it's a 1st stage Pokemon. And then there's also Pokemon that give you different stats when you defeat them. So Butterfree is a 3rd stage Pokemon and it will give you 2 special attack and 1 special defense EV. I've put a list in the description below for every Pokemon and what their EV yield is. It's super handy. The effort value mechanic is only available in the core series and the side series, so not in like spin-off games like Mystery Dungeon or Pokemon Ranger. Although Pokemon Legends Arceus also has an effort value system, it works a little bit different and relies on giving special items to your Pokemon. Let me know if you want a video explaining the specifics of Pokemon Legends Arceus EV training, because I'll give you that too. Another important thing is you don't get EVs in battles where you don't get XP. For instance, if you're fighting in the Battle Tower, you don't actually gain XP from those battles, so you also don't gain EVs from the Pokemon you defeat in there. Also, if your Pokemon is level 100, it will also not gain XP anymore and therefore won't change its EVs either. And for instance, in Pokemon Sword and Shield, when you're doing a max raid battle, you only gain XP candies and not actually XP on your Pokemon, so that also means you don't get any EVs from that either. EVs have a maximum of 510 points and 255 points per stat. But because you gain 1 base stat point per 4 EVs, the last 2 EVs are pretty much useless. Later in the video, I'll give you some great tips on how to improve EV training with specific items or strategies, so make sure to stick around for that to make your EV training even easier. But before we get to that, how do you actually EV train your Pokemon? Well, there's a couple ways to go about it. Firstly, you want to figure out which stats you want to EV train your Pokemon in. In the description, I've put a link to Smogon, which is a super handy website that can tell you the best EV spreads for each Pokemon. It even shows you the best movesets for it and why it's so good. Just check out the description anyway, because I've put a lot of helpful links in there to help you out. Also, one last quick thing, I stream live on Twitch, so check me out over there if you're into that. Now let's continue with the EV training. I'll give one example. Say you want to use Garchomp in your Pokemon Brilliant Diamond team, and you want to EV train him. All you need to do is check this page for Garchomp, and here you can see the optimal EV spread for Garchomp is 252 EVs in attack, 252 in speed, and 4 in special attack. Now that you know all of this, it's time to go into your game and EV train your Garchomp. The 2 best ways to do this is, firstly, by using vitamins. Vitamins are items you can find or buy in pretty much every mainline Pokemon game. These items increase your EVs by 10 points per specific stat. So you've got HP up that ups your HP, protein does attack, iron does defense, calcium does special attack, zinc special defense, and carbos ups your speed. Before Generation 8, these items could not raise a stat above 100 EV points, but since Generation 8, you can get them all the way up to 255. And the second way to gain EVs is by defeating Pokemon in battle. Every Pokemon you defeat gives you between 1 and 3 EV points. So the best thing you can do is to go around checking specific routes that have an abundance of Pokemon that give the same EVs when defeated. This way you can easily train one specific stat for a Pokemon. For instance, Rust Turf Tunnel in Pokemon Emerald. In this area, you only encounter Wild Whismur, which gives you 1 HP EV. Now let's get into the part that might get a little bit complicated. So let's get ready to talk about power items, berries, Macho braces, super training, seminars, a virus, not that virus, and feathers. Firstly, we have the Macho brace. It was introduced in Generation 3. When you make a Pokemon in your party hold this item, the EV yield from every Pokemon you defeat is doubled. That means if you defeat a wild Silcoon, you won't get 2 defense EVs, but 4. Yet again, I have a link in the description to where you can obtain this item in each game. Next up is Pokérus. As the name suggests, this is a virus for Pokemon. But don't be scared, it's not a bad virus. It's actually really helpful for EV training. Similar to the Macho brace, Pokérus gives your Pokemon double the EV yield than it would normally get. But it is not an item to be held, but rather a rare condition any Pokemon can get. After every battle, there's approximately a 1 in 22,000 chance any Pokemon in your party gets the virus. When a Pokemon catches this virus, it'll stay infected for 1 to 4 in real life days. Within this time, the virus can spread to any other Pokemon in your party. When the Pokemon with the virus is no longer infected, it will no longer be able to spread the virus to other Pokemon in your party, but it will still have the benefits of getting double EVs per defeated Pokemon. This is something permanent. There is a way to keep the virus active for longer than the initial 1 to 4 days. When you place your contaminated Pokemon in the PC, that timer will be stopped and your Pokemon will stay infected. Sadly, it won't be able to spread the virus within the PC to other Pokemon, but this way you have an easier way to help the virus spread to more Pokemon whenever you want. Next up are power items. Power items were introduced in Generation 4. These are held items to give to your Pokemon, and there is one power item for each specific stat you want to EV train. The power weight is for HP, the bracer is for attack, the belt for defense, the lens for special attack, the band for special defense, and the power anklet is for speed. Every time you defeat a Pokemon while holding a power item, you gain an additional amount of EV points. From Generation 4 to 6, this was an additional 4 points, but from Generation 7 onwards, it's an additional 8 EV points. Fun fact, if your Pokemon has Pokérus and is holding a power item, and you defeat a Pokemon that normally gives you 2 EVs, it will now give you the 2 plus 8 EVs, and then double those to get to 20 EVs from only defeating 1 Pokemon. There is a drawback to using power items, and that is that the speed stat of your Pokemon is cut in half while holding the item itself. But don't worry, this is nothing permanent. These power items are only really available after you beat the Elite Four, but they are super worth it when they come available to you. Next up are feathers, or wings as they were known before as in Generation 8. These are consumable items similar to vitamins, but the difference is these only give 1 EV per stat. But unlike vitamins, they can be used if a Pokemon has more than EVs in one stat. There's a feather available for each specific stat, and there's a 7th type feather which is called the Pretty Feather, but its only use is to be sold for money. To see where you get these feathers or wings, I encourage you to check out the description again. I just don't want to waste your time naming everything if you're not interested in this specific thing. Now, EV reducing berries are a fun mechanic because these are berries that you can feed to your Pokemon to lower EVs in a specific stat, and as a bonus, you'll gain some friendship points on them too. These berries are especially useful when you want to reset the EV spread on your Pokemon to give them more optimal EVs. These 6 berries will lower your Pokemon EVs by 10 points. The Pomegg lowers HP, Kelpsy lowers attack, Qualot lowers defense, Hondu lowers special attack, Greppa lowers special defense, and lastly Tomato lowers your speed EVs. In most games, these berries can be found throughout the region or when talking to NPCs like the Berry Master or in the battle areas. Next up is Super Training. This is a mechanic only implemented in the Generation 6 games X and Y and the Generation 3 remakes Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. With Super Training, you can train a Pokemon's EVs by hitting the training bags on the bottom of your screen of your 3DS. Small bags give you 1 EV in a stat after hitting it 10 times, medium bags give you plus 4 EVs after 25 hits, and large bags give you plus 12 EVs after 50 hits. Then there are Super Training regimens, where you face off against a huge Pokemon-shaped balloon and you have to try to score goals by striking footballs at the targets on the balloon. It's a very fun little minigame. There are 3 levels to these minigames. Level 1 gives you 4 EVs in a stat, level 2 8, and level 3 gives you 12 EVs. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, after you get your 4th gym badge, you can send your Pokemon to EV seminars. You can send Pokemon in for specific timings to train up EVs in certain stats. For example, if you want your Pokemon to gain 16 EVs in attack, you can send them in for a long time, which is 4 hours. I've linked a very helpful article that explains in great detail the exact amount of EVs you get per time slot for these seminars. I know what you're thinking right now. Wow, Des, thank you so much for this great information. I want to start EV training immediately. Well, then you can click into this playlist right here where I've compiled the best places for you to EV train your Pokemon in different Pokemon games. So what are you waiting for? Click into the playlist and make your Pokemon unbeatable.